They told us humans died like everything else. That was the first thing they got wrong, and I am the one who had to find out. My name is Selu Varn. In my language that means the one who watches and remembers. It is not a name a parent gives a child out of love. It is a title. My species, the Othic, do not raise children the way warm-blooded creatures do. We are hatched in batches of 400, sorted by temperature and the shape of our skulls, and the ones with the steady eyes are pulled aside and made into watchers. We do not fight. We do not bleed for causes. We observe, we record, and we hand the truth up the chain so that better creatures than us can decide what to do with it. I had watched 11 wars before this one. I had recorded the fall of 3 civilizations and the birth of one. I had seen things that would put cracks in most minds. I thought I was finished being surprised by the universe. Then the Conquered sent me to a rock called Tensor's Drift to watch a small unit of humans fight, and I came back wrong. I came back with something inside me that does not switch off. I am telling you this not because I want your pity. Watchers do not want anything. I am telling you because somebody who is not Othic needs to know what I saw in case the Conquered buries it. And they will try to bury it. They always do. Let me start the way I was trained to start, with the facts. Tensor's Drift was nothing. That is important to understand. It was a mining moon at the cold edge of a system nobody had bothered to name properly. A gray ball of frozen ammonia and metal with a thin, sour atmosphere that you could breathe for about 20 minutes before it started eating the inside of your lungs. There were perhaps 9,000 people living there. Most of them were human, with a scattering of other species who had married in or signed on for the mining wages. They pulled rare conductive metals out of the crust and shipped them off-world, and in return, the wider galaxy mostly forgot they existed. The reason I was sent there had nothing to do with the moon, and everything to do with a question my superiors could not answer. The question was simple: are humans worth the trouble? You have to understand how my people and the Conquered generally saw humans at that time. We did not hate them. Hatred requires that you take a thing seriously. We saw them the way you might see a weed that grows fast and chokes a garden. Humans had come out of their little blue world only a few hundred of their years before. They had no ancestral claim, no old treaties, no respectable history of restraint. They bred quickly. They argued constantly, even among themselves, even in the middle of a crisis. Their technology was a generation behind the rest of us, sometimes two. And yet they kept turning up, on the trade routes, in the border colonies, in the mercenary contracts that the older species were too proud to take. The Conquered's intelligence directorate had a theory, and the theory was unflattering. The theory was that humans survived not because they were strong, but because they were cheap. They flooded a place with bodies. They accepted losses that any sane species would refuse. They were, in the cold language of my superiors, a species that won by being willing to die in numbers the galaxy found distasteful. My task was to confirm this. I was to embed with a human military unit during an actual engagement and record in clinical detail exactly how they fought. The Conquered wanted proof for the archive. Proof that humans were not brave, only desperate. Proof that their famous resilience was just a high tolerance for slaughter. With that proof in hand, the older powers could justify keeping humans penned into the unimportant systems, denied the better worlds, denied the seats at the table. I want to be honest with you about something. I did not question the assignment. I did not think the humans deserved better. I packed my recording array and my breathing filters and I went, the way I had gone to 11 wars before, expecting to be bored by the predictable ugliness of creatures killing each other over rocks. The Conquered transport dropped me at Tensor's Drift 40 hours before the attack came. The unit I was assigned to was small. The humans called it a company, though by Conquered standards it was barely a reinforced platoon, 212 soldiers. They were a mixed garrison force, the kind of unit you station at a forgotten mining moon when you do not expect anyone to ever attack it. Half of them were regulars. The other half were what the humans called locals on contract. miners who had picked up a rifle for extra pay, people who had never fired at a living target in their lives. Their commander was a woman named Captain Oduya. I will say her name many times in this account, so you should hear it clearly now. Renko. She was not tall for a human. She had a square, tired face and gray threaded through her dark hair and a way of standing very still while everyone around her moved, like a stone in a stream. When I was first brought to her, I expected the contempt that I usually received from soldiers. Most species hate being watched. They know what a watcher's report can do to them. Renko did not hate it. She looked at me for a long moment with those steady human eyes, and then she said something I did not understand at the time. "Good," she said. "Then somebody real will remember this." I recorded the statement. I flagged it as irrelevant emotional noise. I was a fool. Let me tell you what those 40 hours were like, because the Concord's report skipped them entirely, and I think they matter more than the battle. The garrison station on Tensor's Drift was built into the side of a crater, half above the surface and half dug into the rock. It was cold inside. Not Concord Station cold, where the air is managed to a perfect indifferent chill, but a living, working cold, where condensation froze on the metal walls in little furred patterns, and the humans wrapped their hands around hot drinks not because they had to, but because it gave them something to hold. The whole place smelled of recycled air and machine oil, and something the humans cooked that was thick and starchy, and somehow comforting even to me. And I do not eat human food. I watched them prepare. That was my whole job, so I watched closely. They were afraid. I want to be clear about that because the Concord likes to pretend humans feel nothing, that they are some kind of unfeeling swarm. They were not. They were terrified. I could read it in the way the young ones laughed too loudly and the older ones went quiet. I could read it in the way a miner named Petter, a heavy man with burned scars on his forearms, cleaned the same rifle 4 times in 1 hour, not because it was dirty, but because his hands needed a job to keep from shaking. The signal had come in early. A raider clan called the Vihas had broken off from the larger war along the rim and gone hunting for soft targets, places they could strip of metal and people. The Vihas were not a species the Conquered respected either, but they were respected in the way you respect a predator. They were big, armored creatures with 4 arms and a religion built around taking. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners in any sense you would recognize as mercy. When they came for a colony, the colony stopped existing, and the Vihas moved on fatter than before. 3 Vihas assault craft were coming for Tensor's Drift. The Conquered, in its wisdom, had calculated that the cost of defending a worthless mining moon exceeded the value of the moon, and had ordered no reinforcements. Renko's 212 were on their own. I remember the moment she told them. She gathered the whole company in the largest space the station had, a vehicle bay with the cold pressing in through the great sealed doors. She did not climb on anything. She did not raise her voice into a speech. She just stood in the middle of them and told them the truth, plainly, the way you would tell someone the weather. No reinforcements were coming. 3 Vihas craft, roughly 900 warriors, were inbound. Their job was not to win. Their job was to hold the station and the evacuation tunnel long enough for the 9,000 civilians to reach the deep mine shafts, where the Vihas could not easily follow, and to keep holding until a Conquered relief group arrived in approximately 60 hours, if it arrived at all. 60 hours, against 900 Vihas, with 212 soldiers, half of them miners. I had recorded enough battles to do the arithmetic instantly. It was not a defense. It was a delay measured in lives. By every model my people used to predict combat, that company would be dead within the first day, and the civilians would die in the mines a few days after. I expected the humans to break when they heard it. I expected refusals, desertions, the kind of ugly unraveling I had seen in other species when they were handed a death sentence and asked to thank the one who gave it. Here is what happened instead. A long silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the cold ticking in the walls. And then a young soldier near the front, a girl who could not have been more than 19 of their years, raised her hand. Renko nodded at her, and the girl asked in a small, clear voice, "The civilians, the kids in the lower habs, are we getting them out first? Not are we going to die? Not is there another way?" She asked about the children. Renko said yes, the children first, then the elderly, then the wounded, then anyone who could not fight. The fighters would go last or not at all. And the girl nodded and lowered her hand, and that was it. The company went to work. I sat in the corner of that vehicle bay with my recording array humming, and I felt, for the first time in a very long career, that I did not fully understand what I was looking at. Let me describe the work, because the work told me things the battle would later scream. Renko split her people into 3 groups. One group, the strongest fighters, would hold the main station entrance, where the VHAS would land and push. The second group would hold the evacuation tunnel itself, the long throat of rock that led down to the deep mines, because that tunnel had to stay open no matter what. The third group, mostly the miners, would run the evacuation, herding 9,000 frightened people through the dark in an orderly line while the killing happened above them. I attached myself to Renko's group at the main entrance, because that was where the worst of it would be, and a watcher goes to the worst of it. That is the job. In the hours before the VHAS arrived, I watched these people do small, strange things that made no military sense, and that I could not stop recording. I watched Petter, the burn-scarred miner, take off a battered metal token he wore on a cord around his neck and press it into the hand of the 19-year-old soldier, the one who had asked about the children. He told her it was lucky. He told her to give it back to him when this was over. They both knew it might not come back. They both pretended it would. She put it around her own neck and tucked it under her armor, and something passed between them, a heavy old man and a frightened young woman, that had nothing to do with the rock or the metal or the war. I watched 2 soldiers who had clearly been arguing about something for years, you could tell by the worn-in shape of their bickering, suddenly stop arguing. One of them said, "If I don't make it, tell my brother I wasn't angry anymore." And the other one, who had been so ready to fight a moment before, just put a hand on his shoulder and could not speak. I watched Renko walk the line of her defenses, slow and steady, stopping at every single person, not to inspect their weapons, to say their name. She knew all 212 names. She said each one and asked each soldier one small specific human thing. How is your mother's breathing? Did the medicine help? Did you patch things up with your daughter before the comms went down? Is your hand still bothering you from the loader accident? She carried all of it in her head, all these small private weights, and she set each one down in front of its owner like she was saying, "I see you. You are a whole person to me, not a number in a line." I did not have language for what she was doing. My people have no word for it. The closest thing in the Concord's clinical vocabulary is morale management, and that word is an insult to what I saw. She was not managing them. She was loving them in the strange, fierce, practical way humans love, and she was doing it on purpose, deliberately, because she knew that in a few hours she was going to ask every one of them to die, and she wanted them to die as people and not as ammunition. I had been sent to prove that humans fought because they did not value their lives. By the end of those 40 hours, I had recorded the exact opposite. I had recorded a unit of people who valued every single life with an intensity that frightened me, who knew the names and mothers and old arguments and lucky tokens of every soul around them, and who were preparing to spend those lives anyway, on purpose, with their eyes open, for 9,000 strangers in the dark. That is not the behavior of a species that does not care. That is the behavior of a species that cares so much it has learned to do the impossible thing, the thing my people cannot do. They had learned to hold on to how much it would hurt, and walk toward the hurt anyway, and not look away. I did not write that in my report. Not yet. I told myself it was sentiment. I told myself the battle would strip it away and show me the truth underneath, the desperation, the cheap willingness to die. The battle came. It came at the end of the moon's long night, in that gray hour when the distant sun finally crawled over the crater rim and turned the frozen ammonia plains the color of old bone. The VHAS did not announce themselves. The first I knew of it was the station's alarm, a low sound that I felt in the metal of the floor before I heard it, and then the whole structure shuddered as the first assault craft hammered down onto the surface outside. I was beside Renko at the main entrance when it began. I had my array running. I had my filters sealed. I told myself I was ready. You are never ready. That is the second thing they got wrong when they trained me. They told me a watcher learns to feel nothing. They were wrong. A watcher learns to keep recording while they feel everything. There is a difference, and I learned it that morning. The VHAS came through the outer airlock in a wave. They were exactly as terrible as their reputation. Each one stood half again as tall as a human, plated in dark chitinous armor, 4 arms each carrying a weapon or a blade, mouthparts working in a wet clicking rhythm that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. They did not advance with caution. They poured in, hundreds of them, with the total confidence of predators who had done this 1,000 times and never lost. And the humans held. I do not know how to make you understand the first 10 minutes of that fight because I had no framework for it. I had seen disciplined armies. I had seen fanatics. I had never seen what these 200 people did. They did not panic. They did not break and run, the way my models said they would. They held their lines exactly where Renko had placed them, and they fired in disciplined, overlapping arcs, and when one of them fell, the soldier beside them shifted to cover the gap without being told smoothly, like water filling a hole. The miners, the ones who had never fired at a living thing, stood beside the regulars and learned in real time, in seconds, how to kill or how to die, and most of them learned how to do both. Petter, the burn-scarred man, held a doorway almost by himself for a span of time that should have been impossible. I recorded him taking a VHAS blade across the side and not going down, just shifting his weight and putting 3 rounds into the thing's open mouthparts, and roaring something at the next one in a language I did not need translated. It was not a word. It was the sound a creature makes when it has decided that the only way through it is over its body. The 19-year-old, the girl with the lucky token, I lost track of her in the chaos and then found her again in my array's playback later, and what I saw made my recording hands go still. She had pulled a wounded regular out of the open, a man twice her size, dragging him by the collar with one hand while she fired her sidearm with the other, screaming at him to stay awake, to stay with her, using his name over and over like the name itself could hold his soul in his body. The VHAS had never seen this. I am certain of it. I watched them, and I am trained to read the behavior of creatures under stress, and I watched the VHAS confusion build into something that, in another species, I would have called fear. Because the VHAS understood killing. They understood overwhelming a target. What they did not understand was a target that would not behave like prey. Every model of conquest the VHAS had ever used depended on the moment when the defenders broke, when self-preservation overcame discipline, and the line dissolved into individuals running for their lives. That moment is how you win a slaughter. You do not have to kill all of them. You only have to kill enough that the rest decide their lives are worth more than the fight. The humans never gave them that moment. The line bent, the line bled. The line lost people in 1s and 2s and then in larger groups as the VHAS numbers told. But the line did not break. Every time it should have broken, by every law of war I knew, some human did something that held it together for one more terrible minute. Renko's steady voice on the comms, calm as still water, calling adjustments. A wounded soldier crawling back to their position rather than to safety. Petter in his doorway. The girl and her endless screaming of names. I stopped narrating my own recording. I realized this much later, listening back. For the first 40 hours I had narrated everything in the flat clinical voice of a watcher, time-stamping, labeling, contextualizing. From the moment the VHAS came through that airlock, my narration simply stops. The array kept recording, but I had no words. There were no words in my training for what I was seeing. I was watching a species that had been handed a death sentence and had decided, every single one of them, to make the universe pay the full price for it. Not out of desperation. Not because their lives were cheap. The exact opposite. Because their lives and the 9,000 lives in the dark below them were the most precious things any of them had ever known, and they were not going to let the VHAS have a single one of them for free. The first assault craft's wave was thrown back. 212 humans, now closer to 170, had held the main entrance against the first 300 VHAS and pushed them out of the airlock, and sealed it again with the bodies of their own dead used as a barricade because the doors were damaged and there was nothing else. I remember Renko in that pause between waves. She was bleeding from a wound on her arm that she had not bothered to look at. She was moving down the line again and her voice was still steady, but I was close enough to see her face, and her face was not steady at all. Her face was a thing I had no name for. She was counting the missing. I could see her doing it. She was looking at the gaps in her line and putting names to them, the same names she had spoken so carefully 40 hours before, and she was carrying each death the way she had carried each life, fully, without looking away. She caught me watching her. She always knew when she was being watched, that one. She did not tell me to stop recording. She looked at my array, and then she looked at me and she said, "How many?" I understood the question. She wanted to know the count, the Concord's casualty estimate, the cold number my people would file away. I told her how many of her 212 were already gone. She nodded slowly, and then she said the thing that I have never been able to delete from my memory, the thing that turned a clinical assignment into the wound I carry now. She said, "Write it down right, all their names, not a number." She gestured at the dead piled in the broken doorway, her own people, the barricade of them. "The Concord's going to read your report and they're going to see a number and they're going to decide we were cheap, that we threw ourselves away because that's all we're good for." Her steady voice cracked then, just once, just at the edges. "We're not cheap. Look at them. Look at what each one of them cost. You make them see that. That's your job now. You make them see what it cost." And then the second wave came, and there was no more time to talk, and I lifted my array, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I watched, I remembered, and for the first time in 11 wars, I was no longer sure I was watching from the outside. Part 1 ends here. Part 2 continues with the second and third waves, the collapse of the line, and the climax in the evacuation tunnel. The second wave was worse and the humans were fewer, and I learned that day that those two facts do not change anything about how a human fights. That is the part the conquered will never believe. They think courage runs out like fuel. They think it is a finite thing you spend until you are empty and then you break. They are wrong. I watched it not run out. I watched it do the opposite. Let me go back to where I stopped. The VHAS had been thrown out of the airlock once. They came again before the humans had time to bleed. The damaged doors would not seal fully now, and so the second wave did not have to batter their way in. They simply pushed against the gap, hundreds of them, and the humans met them in the breach with their bodies and their rifles and the barricade of their own dead. I want to tell you about the girl now because this is where her story turns, and I owe it to her to tell it right. Renko had told me to write the names, so I will write hers. Her name was Private Sira Voss. No relation to the raiders, of course. It was a common enough human name, and she used to joke about it. The soldiers told me later that she had been born with the enemy's name, and so she was owed a fight with them. She was 19 years and 4 months old by their reckoning. She had a younger brother in the lower halves, one of the children being herded into the deep mines below us even as she fought. She wore Petter's lucky token under her armor, the battered metal disc he had pressed into her hand, and told her to give back when this was over. In the second wave, Sira Voss did something I did not understand until much later. A section of the line broke, not from cowardice, from simple subtraction. There were too many Vihas and too few humans, and on the left side of the breach, a knot of 3 soldiers went down almost together, and the gap they left was wide enough for the raiders to pour through, and once the Vihas were inside the line behind the defenders, everything would unravel. Renko saw it. I heard her on the comms, calling for someone to plug the left, and there was no one. Everyone was already holding something. There was no reserve. There had never been a reserve. Siravas left her position and ran into the gap alone. I had my array on her. I have watched the recording more times than is healthy. She did not hesitate at the edge of it. She did not weigh her life against the gap. She simply went, the way a hand goes to cover a wound before the mind has decided anything, and she put herself in the breach where 3 soldiers had just died, 1 small human against the tide, and she held it. She held it for 91 seconds. I counted later, frame by frame. In those 91 seconds she killed 4 Vihas, which should have been impossible for a soldier her size against creatures that large. She did it by refusing to fight the way they expected. She got in close, under their reach, where their 4 arms became a tangle and their size became a liability, and she put rounds into the soft places under their armor, and she did not stop moving and she did not stop screaming. Not in fear. She was calling out over and over, "Hold the line, hold, I've got the left, hold the line," telling the others she had it, telling them to stay where they were, buying them the seconds they needed to not have to come and die with her. Renko got 2 soldiers free to reinforce the left. They reached Siravas at second 91. They were too late by the smallest margin the universe keeps. A Vihas blade had already found her. She was down when they arrived, and they killed the thing that had done it, and they dragged her back behind the line, and one of them, a medic, worked on her in the middle of the breach with rounds going overhead, and I recorded all of it because that is my function, and because I could not look away, and because I had begun, somewhere in the last hour, to understand that looking away would be a kind of theft. These deaths wanted a witness. They had earned one. She did not die right away. That is the cruelty of human bodies. They hold on. She lay behind the line while the second wave was thrown back at terrible cost, and when there was a pause, Petter came. He had held his doorway again. He was a ruin of a man by then, bleeding from 3 places, 1 arm hanging wrong. He came and he knelt by her and he took her hand. I was close. My filters were sealed, but I could hear them through the array. She was trying to give him back the token. Her fingers were at her own collar, fumbling for the cord because she had promised to give it back when this was over, and some part of her dimming mind had decided that this now was over for her at least. She wanted to keep her promise. That was the thing pulling at her at the end. Not fear, not pain, a promise about a lucky charm. Petter would not take it. He folded her hand closed over it. He told her to keep it. He told her she would give it back to him later after, when they were both old and this was just a story they told. He lied to her, gently, with his whole heart, the way humans lie to the ones they love when the truth is too heavy to hand them in their last minutes. And she believed him, or she chose to. And she stopped fumbling for the cord, and she held the token in her closed fist, and she let the big scarred man hold her hand. And a little while after that she was gone. I recorded it, the light going out of a 19-year-old who had killed 4 Vihas to hold a gap so that 2 strangers would not have to die in it. I recorded Petter's face. I have no words for Petter's face. My language has 400 words for the textures of stone, and not one for what was on that man's face when the girl he had given his luck to stopped breathing while holding it. He stood up. He picked his rifle back up with his one good arm. He went back to his doorway. That is the thing. That is the thing the conquered cannot model, and I could not model, and the Vihas could not model. He went back to his doorway. The grief did not empty him. It did not break him into something useless. It went into him, and it came back out as the absolute refusal to let her death by the Vihas anything at all. If she had held the left for 91 seconds, then he would hold his doorway for the rest of his life, however long or short that turned out to be, and he would make them climb over him to get to the children she had died to protect. The third wave came when the humans numbered 91. By a coincidence, I do not have the heart to call anything but cruel. That was the same number as the second Sierra Voss had bought them. 91 humans, against what was left of 900 Vihas, which my array estimated at perhaps 500 still able to fight. Renko made the call I had been waiting for since the first alarm. She gave up the main entrance. This was not a retreat in the sense the conquered means it. She was not saving herself. The evacuation was not finished. The civilians were still flowing into the deep mines through the long throat of the tunnel, and the tunnel was the only thing that mattered now, and the main entrance could no longer be held by 91 people. So Renko pulled her surviving fighters back into the mouth of the evacuation tunnel itself, into that narrow throat of rock where the Vihas numbers would mean less, where 500 raiders could only come at them a few at a time, and she set her line there, across the tunnel, the last cork in the last bottle, with 9,000 lives behind her in the dark and 500 Vihas in front. I went with them. A watcher goes to the worst of it, and the worst of it was now the tunnel. I have witnessed final stands before, 11 wars. I have a clinical category for them. The defenders, knowing the end has come, fight with the abandon of the doomed, and it is ugly and brief, and then it is over. That is the pattern. That is what a last stand is. What happened in the throat of that tunnel did not fit the pattern, and I have spent every day since trying to understand why. It was not abandon. That is the thing I keep returning to. The 91 humans in that tunnel did not fight like the doomed. They fought like people who still had everything to protect because they did. They fought with discipline, with care, with that same terrible mutual attention I had watched Renko build in the 40 hours before the battle. They covered each other's gaps. They called each other's names. When a soldier was hit, others pulled them back out of the line and into the deeper tunnel, never leaving a body where the Vihas could take it, never once treating a fallen comrade as spent ammunition. Even now, even at the end, they carried their dead. I asked Renko about it later, in the part of the story I have not reached yet, the part where I learned why. But I noticed it then in the tunnel, and it broke something open in me. They were dying, and they would not stop being a family while they did it. The Vihas were a swarm of individuals who happened to attack in the same direction. The humans were something else. They were 91 people who had decided that the worst thing was not dying. The worst thing was dying alone, or letting someone beside you die alone, or letting the people in the dark behind you die because you had finally, understandably, looked to your own survival. The Vihas broke first. I need you to understand how impossible that sentence is. 500 armored predators against 91 humans, most of them wounded, in a fight the Vihas had every reason to expect to win in minutes. And the Vihas broke first. Not all of them. But I watched it happen. I watched it in their behavior, the thing my training is built to read. I watched the Vihas confidence, which had survived 2 waves and their own staggering losses, finally crack against the simple fact that these humans would not behave correctly, would not run, would not break, would not at any point decide that their own lives were worth more than the line. The Vihas came at a wall that bled and shrank and never once stopped being a wall, and somewhere in the third wave the predators began, for the first time in their long history of slaughters, to be afraid of their prey. There is a moment I have isolated in my array. A single Vihas, a large one, clearly a leader by its markings at the front of a press of its own warriors. It reaches the human line. Across from it stands Petter, one-armed, soaked in his own blood and the girl's memory, holding the center of the tunnel with 2 regulars on either side of him. And the Vihas leader, this veteran of who knows how many easy victories, stops. It stops, for just a moment. It looks at the one-armed dying man who will not move, and at the line of impossible humans who will not break, and in the body language of that creature, I read something I had never recorded in a Vihas before. I read the dawning, horrified comprehension that it had brought the wrong weapon to this fight, that there was no amount of force that would make these creatures do the one thing every conquest depends on. That it could kill every single one of them, and they would simply die without breaking. And dying without breaking is not the same as being defeated, and the Vihas had finally met an enemy that understood the difference. Then the moment passed, and the Vihas leader came on because it had no other gear, and Petter killed it. The one-armed miner killed the Vihas leader in the mouth of the tunnel, and the press behind it faltered, and the humans held. The relief group arrived at hour 58, 2 hours ahead of the worst estimate, which is the only mercy in this entire account, and even that mercy came too late for almost everyone it was meant to save. When the conquered cruisers finally burned down through the sour atmosphere of Tensor's drift and broke the back of what was left of the Vihas assault, there were 19 humans still alive in the throat of that tunnel. 19 out of 212. They had held for 58 hours. They had broken 900 Vihas. Every one of the 9,000 civilians reached the deep mines alive. Sira Voss's younger brother was among them. He is alive today because his sister ran into a gap she could not hold and held it anyway for 91 seconds. And Captain Oduyarenko was one of the 19. She was on her feet when the relief group came through, because of course she was, swaying, gone gray in the face. Her arm long since stopped bleeding because there was not much left in her to bleed. She was on her feet at the front of her 19, between them and the last of the Vihas, and when the conquered soldiers reached her, the first thing she did was not collapse and not weep and not ask for help. The first thing she did was begin to say the names. Part 2 ends here. Part 3 is the resolution, the aftermath, what Renko tells Selu Varn about why humans carry their dead, the fate of the report, and the closing line. The first thing she did was begin to say the names. I have to slow down here, because this is the part that ruined me, and ruined things should be handled gently. Renko stood in the wreckage of the tunnel with the conquered relief soldiers staring at her, and she did not let them help her, not yet. She turned to face the dead. They were everywhere. They were stacked where they had fallen and where their comrades had pulled them, because the humans had carried their dead back out of the line all through 58 hours and had never once left one of their own to be taken. The whole throat of the tunnel was lined with them. 212 minus 19. 193 people. And Renko began to say their names. She started at one end and she walked the line, slow, swaying, and she said each name out loud. Not to anyone, not for the record. She said them for the dead themselves, I think, or for some human reason I still do not fully hold. Petter. She said Petter, and she stopped at the big one-armed body in the center of the tunnel, and she stood there a moment. Sira Voss. She said Sira Voss. And one of the 19 survivors, the medic who had worked on the girl in the breach, made a sound that I will not try to describe. She said all 193. It took a long time. The conquered soldiers, who had come to save these people, and had arrived to find them mostly already saved at a price the conquered would never have paid, stood and watched a dying woman name her dead, and not one of them interrupted her, and I think even they understood that they were witnessing something they did not have the right to stop. I recorded every name. My array has them all in her voice in the order she walked. It is the most important file I have ever made. The conquered does not know I still have it. That is part of why I am telling you this. When she was finished, she finally let them carry her to the medics, and on the way she found me. She always knew when she was being watched. She was barely conscious, but she looked at my array, and then at me, and she had just enough left in her to ask the question that had been the whole point of my assignment, the question the conquered sent me 40,000 light years to answer. "Did you get it?" she said. "Did you get what it cost?" I told her yes. I told her I had it all. And then I did something a watcher is never supposed to do. I asked a question of my own. I had carried it through the whole battle and I could not hold it any longer. I asked her why they carried their dead. Why, in the throat of that tunnel with 500 vihas in front of them and their own survival hanging by a thread, they had spent precious seconds and precious effort dragging the bodies of the fallen back out of the line, when those seconds and that effort might have kept more of the living alive. It made no military sense. By every model my people use, it was a fatal sentimentality. It was the exact behavior the conquered pointed to as proof that humans were irrational, that they valued the wrong things, that they were not serious. Renko looked at me for a long moment with those steady, fatting eyes, and she gave me the answer that broke me, and I am going to give it to you exactly, because she earned the right to be quoted correctly. She said, because the ones in the dark behind us were watching, the kids, they were watching their parents and their neighbors decide whether the people who fell were worth carrying. She breathed, and it cost her. If we leave our dead in the dirt to save ourselves a few seconds, then that's the lesson. That's what those kids learn about what a person is worth, that you carry them while it's easy and you drop them when it's hard. Her voice was almost gone now. We carry our dead so the living know they'll be carried too. That's the whole thing, that's the only thing. You carry each other. You never put anybody down because it got hard, never. Then they took her to the medics, and I did not speak to her again. She lived. I want you to know that. Captain Oduyarenko survived Tensor's drift. 18 of her people survived with her. The conquered patched them up and decorated them quietly and scattered them across 19 different postings so they could never gather and tell the story together in one room, because a story told by one person can be doubted, but a story told by 19 survivors in the same room becomes a fact, and the conquered did not want this to be a fact. Now let me tell you what happened to my report. This is the part the conquered will try to bury, so I am putting it where they cannot reach. I wrote it the way she asked me to. I wrote it right. I did not file the clinical summary my superiors expected, the one with the casualty number and the cost-benefit conclusion, and the recommendation that humans be kept penned in the unimportant systems because they fight by throwing bodies into the grinder. I could not write that report anymore. It was a lie, and I had spent 11 wars not knowing the difference between a true report and a false one, and now I knew, and I could not unknow it. I wrote all the names, 193 of them, and the 19 who lived. I wrote Sira Voss and her 91 seconds and the token she died holding. I wrote Petter and his doorway and the gentle lie he told a dying girl. I wrote the Vihas leader's moment of hesitation, the dawning horror of a predator that had finally met prey it could kill but could not defeat. I wrote Renko saying the names in the ruined tunnel. I wrote what she told me about carrying the dead. And then I wrote my conclusion, which was the opposite of the one I was sent to deliver. I wrote that the conquered had asked the wrong question. The question was never whether humans valued their lives. They value their lives more than any species I have ever recorded, with an intensity that should make them the most cautious creatures in the galaxy. The real thing, the thing the conquered does not want written down, is this. Humans value each other more than they value their own survival, and they have built that valuing into a discipline, a practice, a thing they do on purpose under fire, and that makes them the most dangerous defensive force in known space. You cannot conquer a people who will not break. You cannot frighten a people who have already decided that the worst thing is not death but abandonment. You cannot win by making them choose between their lives and their line, because they made that choice long before you arrived, every one of them, in the quiet, with their eyes open. I filed that report. The conquered rejected it. Of course they did. They flagged it as compromised by observer emotional contamination, which is the clinical term my people use when a watcher stops being a tool and starts being a person. They ordered me to revise it. They wanted the number. They wanted the cheap body's conclusion. They had already written the policy they wanted to support, and they had sent me to fetch the evidence, and I had come back with the wrong evidence, and so the evidence had to be the problem. I refused. A watcher does not refuse. There is no precedent for it. We are bred from the steady-eyed hatchlings precisely so that we will never do what I did. But I had stood in the throat of that tunnel and watched 193 people decide, every one of them, that there were things worth not breaking for. And I found when the conquered ordered me to break that I could not, that I had caught it from them, whatever it is. That terrible human refusal to put down the thing that matters just because holding it has gotten hard. So I am no longer a watcher. They have taken the title. They have sealed the official archive and entered the number and the cheap body's conclusion. And somewhere in a conquered vault, the lie about Tensor's drift sits waiting to be used the next time the old powers want a reason to keep humans down. But I kept the file, the real one, the names in her voice, the 91 seconds, the token, the doorway, the hesitation of the VHAS leader, all of it. I kept it, and I have spent the time since then putting it where it cannot be sealed in front of whoever will receive it, which now means you. You asked if you are the kind of creature who asks why I titled this the way I did, why I said I wish I had never seen it. I will tell you, and then I am finished. I do not wish it because the horror was too great, though it was great. I have seen horror before, 11 wars of it. The horror is not what changed me. I wish I had never seen it because before Tensor's drift, I was at peace. I was a steady-eyed thing that watched the universe kill itself and filed the truth and felt nothing. And there was a kind of mercy in that emptiness, the mercy of not having to carry anything. I could have lived my whole long Othic life in that gray peace and died never knowing what I was missing, and the not knowing would have been a comfort. But I saw it now. I saw what these short-lived, fast-breeding, quarrelsome creatures do under the worst the universe can offer. I saw a 19-year-old hold a gap she could not hold. I saw a one-armed man go back to his doorway after the light went out of the girl he gave his luck to. I saw a dying captain name 193 of her dead so that no one would ever reduce them to a number, and then I watched the conquered reduce them to a number anyway. And now I cannot unsee any of it. Now I know that the gray peace I lived in for 11 wars was not peace at all. It was just an emptiness I had mistaken for peace because I had never once seen what a full thing looks like. I know now what it costs to care the way humans care. I watched it cost them everything. And I know now that I will spend the rest of my life unable to look away from that cost, unable to file the comfortable lie, unable to be the steady-eyed thing I was made to be. Because I have seen the alternative, and the alternative is the only thing in this whole cold galaxy that ever looked to me like it was worth dying for. That is why I wish I had never seen it. And that is the lie, because given the choice again, knowing everything it would take from me, I would go back to that tunnel and watch every second of it again. I would carry every name. I would let it ruin me a second time gladly, because some things are too important to look at safely, and a being who has never been ruined by something true has never really seen anything at all. They told us humans died like everything else. They were wrong. Humans do not die like everything else. Humans die carrying each other. And once you have seen that, you can never again be the kind of creature who puts anyone down.